World Industries is the craziest skateboard company to ever exist. By the end of this video, I will have you convinced of this fact. Growing up in the early 2000s and being into skateboarding, this logo and these characters were unavoidable. They were printed on the bottom of skateboards, blasted onto t-shirts, stickers, pants, you name it. These guys were everywhere. But now, in modern skate culture, that's far from the case. Many will attest that their first ever skateboard was a World Industries deck and passionately discuss how much they miss World Industries and what they used to be. And I can't lie, I'm in the same boat. I've always wondered what happened to one of my favorite companies and why they fell so far from grace. Through my research, I've discovered just how ridiculous of a company World Industries was, not just in terms of business practice, but business accomplishments as well. They changed and revolutionized an entire industry, and did it in their own way, on their own time, and didn't listen to anybody. The story itself is so absurd, and their beginnings are so humble, it almost feels fake, like it couldn't have happened. But of course, it did. This is the rise and fall of World Industries. The story of World Industries begins with one man, professional skateboarder Steve Rocco. Born January 16, 1960, Rocco grew up in a small house in Hermosa Beach, California, with his 6 brothers and sisters, and was the oldest son of a hard-working Italian descent dry cleaner. As he got older, Rocco got really good at riding his skateboard, and did tricks for people out on the boardwalk. The style of skating he practiced was called freestyle skating, also known as flatland skating. And by the late 1970s, Steve Rocco had become a master at it. During this time, skate competitions were a huge deal, and all the best freestyle skaters would get together and compete to see who was top dog, with first place almost always going to Rocco. But this didn't last for long, because in 1980, a shy 13-year-old kid from Florida hit the scene. His name was Rodney Mullen, and he was the first ever person to give Steve a run for his money. At the Oasis contest in 1980, Rodney entered in against Steve and beat him. And of course, this hurt Steve's ego and he was not happy. But Steve says he wasn't so much angry with Rodney, rather upset that the judges were so lost. After the competition, Steve and Rodney became friends and started skating together. Rodney said Steve was like a big brother, someone he could look up to and learn from. Around this time, Rocco was doing well for himself in the skateboarding world. He was heavily involved and well known by others for his accomplishments. But his attitude toward the skating industry was about to change. During the late 80s, there were 3 skateboard companies who reigned supreme above all: Powell Peralta, Santa Cruz, and Vision Skateboards. And Brad Dorfman, owner of Vision Skateboards, made Rocco captain for one of Vision's skate teams. But shortly after becoming friends with Rodney, he was kicked off Vision as team captain, and had no idea what to do. He thought his life was over, at least in terms of skateboarding. But that night, after getting kicked off Vision, he asked his friend Skip Engblom to hang out. And he told Skip about getting kicked off Vision and how he's gonna have to go back to his dad's dry cleaning store. But Skip said, "Nah, you'll be fine. Just meet me tomorrow and cash out your credit cards for as much as you can. I'll show you how to make money." And this is where World Industries truly begins, in the year 1987. So the next day, Rocco met up with Skip at this old Italian wood shop, which mostly made bar stools and dining room furniture. He gave Skip $6,000 cashed out from credit cards and bought 500 blank boards. He then showed Rocco where to get them screened and where to sell them. And within 3 weeks, he doubled his money and had about $12,000 to work with, which he used all of to make a run of t-shirts. And then went back to the same shops who bought his boards and said, "Hey, we have t-shirts." But every shop said, "No, we don't want t-shirts." And he was officially out of business, right from the very beginning. But before starting his own company, Rocco worked as a used car salesman for a man named John Casement. And when he ran out of money after spending it all on t-shirts, he asked John for a $20,000 loan so he could buy more boards and stay in business. But John said, "Nah, you don't want to use me. Borrow from my guy Kirby, he's good luck. You borrow money from him, and you'll be a millionaire in a few years." Within 15 minutes of John telling him this, Rocco was at Kirby's door, ready to make a deal. He offered him half of the company, but Kirby said no. Just pay me $2,500 a month for an entire year, which is some pretty heavy interest. After securing the $20,000, Rocco was off, hustling like a madman. His first move was he convinced professional skater John Lucero to invest in the company. But things didn't go as planned and backfired on Rocco. After seeing the first run of product and how low quality it was initially, Lucero bailed out, leaving Rocco in a tough financial spot. At this point, he had a lot of money tied up, a lot of money to pay back, and none coming in. Completely desperate, he calls Rodney Mullen and asks him for as much money as he can give him, or as he put it, an investment in the company. But it was pretty much Steve's way of saying, "Hey, give me $6,000 right now or I'll be out of business next week." In a split-second decision, Rodney made out a check for $6,000 and handed it to Steve as he was clearing airport security to catch a flight. Steve took the check and he was officially back in business. After Rodney finished college, Steve asked him to come with him to California to work on World Industries full-time. After thinking it over, Rodney said yes, and they were both excited. But after making the decision to work with Steve, Rodney received a call from George Powell, owner of Powell Peralta, and he asked Rodney to come back with them. He said they'd pay back Steve whatever Rodney had invested, plus interest, but that he had to be out. This all took place in the year 1988, and during this time, an upcoming street skater was making a name for himself. His name was Mike Vallely, sponsored by Powell Peralta, and in the coming months, he'd rise to become the #1 street skater in the world. But even though Mike was making a ton of money through board sales, he was fed up with the extreme corporate environment at Powell. And with Rodney leaving Powell and joining Steve, they figured they could use Mike's unhappiness as a wedge to get him to leave Powell as well. So Mike and Rodney sat down, had a frank conversation, and said, "I will if you do." Mike and Rodney left Powell together to join Steve in the first ever skater-owned company, which absolutely crippled Powell. Losing 2 key riders was a giant financial blow and made them resent Rocco and World Industries. Years ago, the idea of a skateboarder owning a company was beyond laughable. Steve Rocco even said Brad Dorfman of Vision Skateboards told him skaters aren't smart enough to run companies. They're not smart enough to do ads, marketing, or even know what other skaters want. But when Rocco was starting up World Industries, big businessmen who had never skated a day in their lives controlled the market. They only worried about profits and viewed street skaters as invaluable pawns. The issue was, skaters just weren't being listened to anymore. But Rocco listened and saw the needs of skaters not being met, and created the answer to everything going on in skating at the time, which is why he was able to get all the best street skaters on his team and elevate street skating to what it is today. Basically, if you worked with Rocco, he made sure you were taken care of, financially and otherwise. And that just made more and more people want to get on his program. He set the industry standard of $2 a board if your name is on it, and gave professional skaters money like they never had before, which allowed them to pursue skating full time. They had so many established street pros on their team and were selling skateboards hand over fist. Everyone involved with World was getting rich, even the team riders. But the guys at Powell Peralta weren't so happy with World's success and wanted to take them down. So they declared war, or rather launched an ad. And then Steve snapped and declared war on the entire skate industry. Powell's advertisement made fun of small companies. And since World was the only small company in the industry, they perceived it as a direct attack and retaliated. Steve fired back with an ad directly responding to Powell's, and with that one ad, took them down. Their board sales plummeted, and World's went through the roof. In response to Powell's ad, they made 3 board graphics mocking theirs and making fun of their initial ad, and it killed them. From then on, it was all-out war with absurd advertisements. It's also been reported that one of the big three skate companies began calling around skate shops and forbidding them from distributing World Industries, or they'd no longer be doing business with them. One day, Steve hit a snag when trying to submit a magazine advertisement, so he called Larry Balma of Transworld to ask what the problem was. Larry said he couldn't run their ad because it was too offensive, and how he had a friend in high school who had killed himself, and didn't feel right about printing the ad. The ad in question was a detailed guide on how to end your life. But after hearing this, Steve went ballistic and said, "Well, that's your story, not mine. If you don't let us do this, we won't run any ads in your magazine." So Steve and his friends created their own magazine called Big Brother, which was a bit of a dumpster fire project, but people loved it for its lack of censorship and just telling it like it is tone. But after starting Big Brother, things took a turn for the worse. In the early 90s, everything within the company began to feel uncertain as tensions grew. With Rocco spending less and less time at the company and off having fun, a lot of team riders felt like he'd become one of the big businessmen he'd set out against. On top of this, sales were far from what they once were, and riders wanted to know where their money was. But they got no answer since Steve was never there anymore. Some even began to believe he was ripping them off. It was a rocky time period for World, but it got 10 times worse when all of World's team riders left and went to girls' skateboards. Due to all of the uncertainty and distrust, they left and went to a newer, smaller company where they could get more attention and have more fun. But this move completely destroyed World. They were left for dead and were bleeding money. Around this time in 1996, Steve brought in professionals to work on the company, but things were still a mess financially. Girl was now dominating the market, and World had no plan of how to get back on top. But this all changed when their artist Mark McKee drew the Devilman graphic for their receptionist's birthday invitation. Steve suddenly realized that this was how they could beat Girl, by doing something they couldn't and wouldn't do. Target the younger skate demographic. And with much of the upcoming market being ages 8 through 12, he couldn't have made a better choice. Along with Devilman, they added Flameboy and Wet Willy, and the logo/character boards began to sell like hotcakes, even outselling pro models by a large margin, which essentially future-proofed the company, so that way if all the riders ever left again, they'd be fine, since their character boards did so well. Throughout 1996, 97, and 98, World used their iconic characters to climb to the top of the skate market, and became the #1 skate brand in the entire world, with their parent company Blind being #2. They were hitting home run after home run, but knew it wouldn't last forever. And with the economy being at an all-time high, they decided to sell. They received just one offer and took it, and sold World Industries for $29 million, and walked away millionaires. It remains one of the biggest deals in skateboarding history, and was also the first ever skate company traded on the stock market. And that's the end of the story. Well, almost. Throughout the early 2000s, World would continue to put out some of their most iconic graphics and were loved by many young skaters. But they quickly began to go downhill as the 2000s wore on. And since 2000, they've been bought and sold 3 separate times. Once by Globe International, then IE Distribution, and finally GVS America. And the constant changes in ownership have made the company feel hollow and soulless in the past years. They've tried to make multiple comebacks at this point, but something's just missing. It's almost like they're just trying to recapture the magic that once was, but can't seem to get it right. But what do you think? Has World Industries fallen off in the recent years, and do you think they'll ever be able to rekindle what they once had? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.